10 years in investment banking experience, both in New York and in Paris, where I worked with CCF, Crédit Commercial de France, which is now part of the HSBC group, in financial engineering, followed by 15 years of industrial experience, 13 in Renault, the car company, and 2 years in setting up the renewable business energy group within Areva. So I'm American, grew up in the States and been living in France for about 23 years now. And so I have a financial education and moved towards using finance to help industrial companies put in place projects, run car programs, and improve the performance. So that's what I bring to the table in terms of my competencies and my cultural background. So regarding perhaps project management, so I think the project management is something you can do not just for industrial projects, but in general it's a question of doing a team, a multifunctional approach to getting a bigger project done. So I think that what I've seen in terms of either investment banking, financial operations, complex financial operations, cross-border with different type of companies, and car program management or large contract management within a renewable energy group like Areva, it's very similar. So it's a question of how do you work in a cross-functional way, where each function contributes to making it happen. And the question is, how do you make sure that everyone works together in one voice, like an orchestra, for instance. So I have this experience in helping to run and to improve Renault's upper end programs. That's referring to as the Versatis, the Spas, and the Laguna 2. Laguna 2 were the vehicles which I had direct responsibility as basically you can say the type of CFO post, Chief Financial Officer for the car program. You act as an orchestra in terms of making beautiful music together. And that's why I think that it's a good analogy. There has to be one person who leads, a maestro who leads the orchestra, but everyone has their part. But they understand they're reading a common music sheet. So they have a common goal, and they have each one an instrument. They're working on the same measure, the same, I'd say, speed of advancing. So, and that's, if it's well done, it's agreeable. Otherwise, it's a total mess.
We're now mentioning like the recent projects. Do you remember like what was your first project? How did you come into that business? Maybe also if you were already planning when you were younger to go into the project management direction, or did it like happen by coincidence?
So it happened more by coincidence rather than by my own planning. I think it's by nature I like being in contact with people and using different skills to get projects done. So I think I'm more of a team player from that point of view. And to the team initially I brought financial skills in understanding how to quantify a project. As I mentioned, initial projects were financial projects. It could be the issuance of debt, the purchase of a company, or that type of project like that. And so from the financial route, I basically added different skills. Accounting skills, understanding the accounting ramifications of a financial project, knowing how to work closely with lawyers, because that's another aspect of more of the financial side of getting things done, is that very quickly you need to understand both the tax, the legal, and the accounting ramifications of a financial project. So I'd say that by my attitude, I was basically projected into a financial, through a financial approach towards a project approach of getting things done. So it's a question if you want to take a passive role in looking and accompanying a project, or I believe getting into a project management point of view, you need to take a more of an active role. More recently, it's as leader, but prior to that, was more taking a look at from a financial point of view, where, for instance, in a car program, typically the person who leads the project is an engineer, or was engineer in terms of experience, So he's able to understand very well from a technical point of view how to get the car program done. And bringing the financial aspect to the project as well is one way to interpret performance. It's not the only way to interpret performance, but I believe it's important that through finance, you're able to quantify quality, customer satisfaction, and that type of, I say, ramifications. More recently, I've been having direct responsibility for leading large project negotiations in terms of getting a contract signed with customers, helping the customer as well get bank financing, or putting in place a new affiliate within the Areva group, for instance, for the UK offshore market. Yes, I did, but that was long before I had the responsibilities for the group's benchmarking and competitive intelligence.
Okay.
In fact, that was one of my first responsibilities coming from the banking community, was to basically help Renault by using these skills, let's say my pluridisciplinary approach of using banking skills, accounting skills, legal skills, and to negotiate contracts. And so from this point of view, putting in place the alliance with Nissan was an industrial and strategic objective for the company. And I was part of the small management team, let's say the task force, that was created to actually make it happen. So this meant that I was working with engineers, working with salespeople, working with quality people to explore what would be the motivation and the opportunity and even the difficulty to put in place the alliance with Nissan. So this is where basically I was using an Excel spreadsheet and performance criteria, and to understand the stake. In other words, how could we work together, and what benefits we were able to get out of working together. And then once I was the second, I was actually referred to as the assistant to the person who had direct responsibility for the project. So, and I helped him to basically build the financial perspective and the roadmap of working with the different functions to put in place the alliance.
The main work was to realize a market survey to adapt Nissan to the European market, so it was to develop Nissan in Asia.
Actually, there were many different function areas which were studied by functional teams. For instance, purchasing, sales, after sales market, project development, common motors. So each, I'd say the alliance was broken down into specific work groups, and that each work group basically had to have, they have responsibility to quantify and to help judge what would be the potential of the alliance, and do that in a common format that I helped to define, in order that by adding the sum of the parts, we would have a financial idea of what would be the interest, both for Nissan and for Renault, to put in place the alliance. And due to the attractiveness of that vision, and the way that it was negotiated by Louis Schweitzer, the president of Renault at that time, he was able to basically get the buy-in from Nissan's executive management to counter the attempts by Daimler at that time to also be the partner of Nissan. So here again, it's a question of teamwork. Everyone has their role. So and after, I'd say, playing the role of a project manager in building the vision of the alliance, I took a financial role to go to Tokyo and to do what's referred to as a due diligence of Nissan's accounts and the risk, because Renault wanted to become a shareholder of the company.
Yes.
And that changed the perspective. That's a very good question, because it actually evokes your own personal contribution and ultimately how the project succeeds. So I think that the ultimate judge has to be the customer in terms of sale revenues, customer satisfaction. So that is, I'd say, the best way to be able to have a clear opinion if the project was a success. before getting that type of feedback from the customer, there has to be very clear metrics in terms of what's been set for the projects. I mentioned the quality costs and delay are the typical metrics for an industrial project. And those type of metrics can be brought to bear on software in terms of development time, in terms of errors, in terms of number of man hours needed to develop the project. And so what's important though, I think as well, is that you have a unified view for the project, of understanding the project as a whole, which typically is the project which is sold to someone else. It could be an Airbus airplane, it could be a vehicle, it could be a bottle of wine for someone, or depending on what obviously the product is. But it's important to break that project down into functional metrics, to understand, for instance, how a motor contributes to the success of a vehicle. So for an engineer, there's very clear metrics about what that means in terms of its the motor's performance, its weight, its torque, its power, and things like that, which are the way to judge is the motor contributing successfully as planned to the vehicle. And the engineers who work on the motor should be judged based upon, or engineers or anyone else who contributes to the motor should be judged based upon their performance for the motor. At some stage, it's very important that the people who are responsible for the vehicle as a whole, this is the bigger management team, and from, for instance, a functional point of view, the head of engineering, the head of purchasing as well, should be as well, I'd say, judged for their remuneration based upon the project and the project success based upon these indicators. So it's a delicate balance between motivating the individual as a contributor and understanding how the project as a whole, as a good sold to a customer, is evaluated. And I think one of the important aspects is being able to create the link between what the customer expects and what that means for the individual contributors to a project. I think it's, here again, it's a question of being a team player and seeing how you can contribute to a project as one of the parts, but always keeping into perspective why you're doing it. And this, I think, is a very important part of project management, is not losing sight of the ultimate goal of what the project means for the company, and if you can, even for the customer. Each person has to find his style. I think it's very important to be true to your values and who you are and the way you interact with whoever it might be. I think what's very important in interacting with famous personalities or less famous personalities with a lot of influence is to be able to be very factual. In other words, to have an opinion and to be able to justify your opinion with facts. Not just I think that, I feel that, those are not good verbs. So this is why my opinion is based upon these numbers, this delay, this risk. This is very useful information for these people, because a lot of times they do not get close to this type of facts. They're in, I'd say, a mindset where they need to motivate people to go beyond the boundaries and to stretch the performance. So it's very important that as a contributor to making something happen, is that you're able to bring it back to metrics which are simple and which are based upon performance in which you can have an impact on. Okay. So I think it's also very important, what I've seen in my own experience, is that you defend your opinion and not be afraid of having an opinion which could be different. But if it is different and you want to explain it, then you need to be very factual. Yes, a lot of differences. I think it's more linked to not if it's a woman or a man, but linked to the person's charisma. The there's different ways of convincing people and motivating people. Yes, there's very, very big differences. A lot will depend upon, I'd say, the educational background, international experience, and how they've either grown in an organization or transferred into an organization. That will depend a lot about what levers they have to change opinions and things like that. I think what brings these personalities together is their ability to communicate, their ability to understand what motivates each of us, and to give a vision which is very motivating and which could take us beyond what we thought we were able to do. Yes, with pleasure. Yes, so Helios Lite is a company which we're creating very soon. We'll be incorporated in the month of April, and it's thanks to my partner, who's a young engineer coming back from America, where he worked for the last 10 years, who had a very clever idea how to make, referred to as a tracker, a sun tracker. It's like a mechanical sunflower. So it's a mechanical support which moves as per the sun to keep a concentrated PV panel focused on the sun. So this is our product, the product which we will be developing this year through 3 ways of prototypes in order to start deliveries in 2014. So it's a product for worldwide markets where the sun is very strong, and in desert areas, which represents a very good portion of the electrical needs in the world today. So my partner is responsible for the technical aspects, and I see my role as president of this new startup company as at this stage of basically giving him the environment which he needs to succeed in developing the product quickly, but respecting the quality and the performance that our customers need for successful solar farms. So I see myself as being a support function in getting the financing, getting all the different elements which are required to help the engineer team, which we're building up now, to succeed the project. So yes, it's a very different environment going to day or two. So and compared to working in organizations with 100,000 people. So it's a much different environment, and the changes basically for me are linked to the fact that I cannot delegate, that I need to roll up my sleeves and do things by myself, which means that I understand very quickly if what I need to get done is done. Am I communicating as I should? Are we building up the momentum as we should? So I find this very enthusiastic, and I enjoy this aspect. It's important that we build up an organization in which we communicate and make sure that we share a common vision. So from this point of view, it's very similar to a large corporation. It simply is the fact that we do not have layers of an organization or different teams to work on projects, that we are basically alone to make sure that the project moves forward quickly. So that means also that we need to keep our focus and work based upon the combination of priorities and urgencies. Personally, I think it's very important to have fun at work and when you're not at work, and the stress is different. What I feel today is that when you work in a large organization, there's a lot of you benefit from a dynamic referred to as an inertia as well. So your impact is limited. Because you benefit from this infrastructure, which is already underway, so you can turn the course a little bit. But when it comes to working in a startup company especially, is that you can see that the very high impact that you have in helping to shape the company and determine next week, next month, next year, where we'll go. And so for me at this stage, at my age and after 25 years of experience, that I feel that I have the skill set necessary to help my partner, to keeping him as an engineer and focused on what he does best. And together, as we share a vision and values, I think that this is, I'd say, the basics that we need to be successful. I think it was an opportunity to say that I've always, I'd say, done things in a very entrepreneurial way. Perhaps it could seem to be a little bit, I'd say, paradoxical with working in very large corporations, but my attitude has always been, in getting a job done, it's my company, it's my job, and I'm responsible for it. So that's the question of your environment and the question of your attitude. And so when I was faced with a choice of either continuing in a large corporate environment, which is very attractive because of you work on huge projects, and so you don't speak in euros, you speak in millions of euros, and so which means that you have to have a much bigger team, infrastructure, different issues and things like that. But it also means that the role that you can have, the impact is different. And I was looking for something with a high potential and going through the growth phases very quickly. And so that at my age, 49 years old, 25 years experience, finance and industrial operations and what I've seen, I feel was a good opportunity to look at this. And moving to the nice sunny region of Savoie and all the different lifestyle aspects was also part of I'd say, the vision of offering my family with 4 children, my wife's a doctor, a better environment to live in.
Yes.
If I may answer. If you could go back in time, would you choose the path of working in a big company or starting your own company from the start?
That's with hindsight, would I change? What I think it's very important is to get the skills. Mm-hmm. So either the skills you can get very effectively in universities, so higher education, and then the question then is what is your appetite for risk, and in terms of what your ambitions are, what is the best way to get it done. I think higher education skill sets have a limit. So in the sense that obviously this is why you have to end one day to get a job and to get to, I'd say, in a different type of world. And so the question is, how do you make the transition? And some people who are very, very entrepreneurial want to jump quickly into the world of being an entrepreneur and have a very clear idea of how their skills, whether it be accounting, marketing, product, technical, and personal skills, are they sufficiently mature to do that right away? From my point of view, I was very attracted to the investment banking as a different way of going beyond my financial skills from the Wharton School, which is a very good school already for finance. It's being challenged with investment banking in Wall Street and other types of financial things, which for me was a very good way of, I'd say, quickly deepening my financial skills. So it was a very specific element. And then as time evolved, I saw that I was looking for a bigger challenge, and which basically means adding a different type of, I'd say, product and different type of functions to getting things done. And then the question was basically, well, having worked on a lot of turnaround projects and things like that, that the time came, I was ready to do it by my own. Well, I think that some people want to do it very quickly. So I changed continents, moving from the States to France, and working on international projects and things like that, which gave me that experience. I think there's some times which is very good. First gate to ask the question is when you leave school. So are you ready, and what are the career opportunities? And today's environment is very different than the environment back in the end of the 80s when I left the Wharton School. So in today's environment, I think I would probably I would have really raised the question of saying, is it, given the economic uncertainty we live in, given the world environment, given the internet as a tool, and I'd say the ease in which you can create companies and have an impact today. So if you're passionate about a subject, I think it's a good opportunity to do it yourself and to test, are you able to do it? Are you able to succeed by yourself? There are other times in which you can say, well, I've learned a certain number of skills. I want to stay with this skill set. I want to deepen my understanding in a business environment. And once I've done that, either I'll leave that, I'd say, cozy environment of large corporations and do it my own, but stay with the skill set, or try to expand, I'd say, what you want to do and move on in a cozy environment, let's say. And in terms of project financing, which was a topic which seems to come back on the table, it's true that you can imagine in today's world that finance determines what happens. So that's not really the reality. It's a question of perspective. Projects don't get done without financing, but financing will not solve an engineer's problems. So here again, it's a question of seeing finance as a necessary resource, just like having a good engineer, having a good purchasing manager, having a good project coordinator is also essential to getting it done. It's simply in today's world we put a lot of focus on financial return, and as corporations don't have a lot of latitude and access to finance, that's one of the critical resources. And there's a language, if you like, which is specific to finance, as there's a language for engineering, as there's a language for each function. And so typically what happens is that there's, I'd say, linguistical barriers. It means that people just don't understand each other. And that in that way, as bankers or even the financial team department within a company, they have different set of objectives and different criteria to measure performance, and that if the project does not communicate in their language, that there will probably be a barrier that will stop the project moving forward smoothly. So what I've seen, for instance, in working on getting financing for large offshore wind projects, the problem was not the ability of the banks to lend money. The question was, how do you structure the contractual relationships and help the banks get comfort on the technical, I'd say, the technical performance and the guarantees that need to back up your claims, to make sure that that was something which met their needs, and that obviously you can say their needs are too high or whatever, but if you want to get financing, then you have to play the game, if you like. And so that means understanding their criteria, their pressure, and once you've understood them, putting yourself in their shoes, here again, is that you open doors. And if you don't do that, then they'll shut and lock the doors before you. So this is, I think, the primary point is making finance your ally, and having a communication towards the financial community, which could be the internal finance department, it could be cost control, or it could be banks, it could be shareholders, it could be financial analysts, but understanding what they look for in terms of metrics, what their perspective is in terms of risks that they can take and cannot take, and to find, is there a compromise? And I think the second point is, after language, speaking the language, is looking for a compromise to make sure that give and take on both sides can make the project done. And this I've seen systematically in either when I was responsible, one of the persons responsible for financial communications within Renault, it was the ability to provide facts, measure performance, and to give, I'd say, a positive interpretation of how to interpret this information, to be credible over time, and to create therefore a confidence in a relationship. And when it comes to working with banks, is to, I'd say, understanding how German banks, French banks, Japanese banks have a little bit different perspectives, and trying to understand how their perspective means they're more or less, I'd say, able to take risk in financing. And for instance, with Areva, after having helped our customer get financing, basically 2 projects needed to get 1.5 billion euros in debt. So, after that experience, and to help them to put this in place, we organized and I coordinated this, referred to as a bank day. And this is typically done in large companies, is either towards the financial analysts who give financial advice to the stock market and that type of investor. There's also the other type of, I'd say, financial community, lending banks. And so we organized this bank day to give better visibility about Areva's offshore wind technology, its performance, the measuring techniques, the guarantees, to make the banks more aware, and having seen on site, it was much more convincing than sitting in a meeting room, and being able to ask questions to the functional heads. This meant that they became much more comfortable with the project, and our turnout was very good. We had something like 70 bankers representing 26 banks and 15 countries. So the turnout was very good. So there is interest. The question is, how do you communicate? And do you speak the same language? I think and this is something we're dealing with now with Helios Lite. We're 2 people, so I'm working on this project, which has, I'd say, the research, the development, the prototype, the commercial phase. So we're living the whole project cycle, if you like, right now. And I think what's very important is, irrespective of the type of project, is you get physical. So, which means that you don't talk about simply metrics. You want to talk about what people do, and you want to break the product down into parts, into nuts, bolts, metal, cable, wiring, and things like that. So you basically, you don't want to stay big picture, but you want to help people find what they do, and once you've done that, you're able to put a price to that. And what's most convenient is you try to use a reference from the past. So a lot of people love to start with a blank sheet of paper. In a company which doesn't exist, obviously, you have nothing but a blank sheet of paper. But in other companies, there's a project which was done before, or another reference and things like that. So you need to start with what exists. So, because if you don't start with what exists, you're able to say a lot of things which might not be true in terms of your references, performance, cost, quality, delay, and things like that. So you need to be traceable and transparent and fact-based. So I think once you have that as your starting point, that you're able to put the parts together, and you're able also, from that point of view, if you're able to see that when you add up the cost and you take into consideration the margin that you need to have to be a profitable company, if you see it doesn't fit with the market, then you know there's a problem. So building up from the physical and moving back from the customer and the market, so you're able to basically confront the 2 visions, cost and market and profitability, to see that if you can, based upon what's been done past, to have a profitable project. And frequently you're not able to do that, because competition means that the prices are continually going down, and that to different effects, you're able to break through and decrease your cost. But what's very important is that when you do the budget, when you set the objectives, is that you're able to have this vision, bottom up and top down from the market, and to basically to share that as well again, transparency, to show that either what you're able to do today in your vision today is sufficient, or that there's a necessity, an urgent need, and not just a wish to reshape the project from its cost point of view. And that it might also be an opportunity to look for additional revenues. I think from budget, that's a very first important point. And in terms of cost control for me, that follows a budget. Once you have a budget and you've broken it down into its small parts, that you're able to put in place a cost control. So this means that you're able to go back and keep the same metrics which you used when you established the budget, and go back hopefully to the same people and say, well, remember, we talked about this. This is the number we agreed to. This is how you measure this. And so, where do you stand today? What's been done? So, and how can you prove it? So, this cost control basically can be boiled down to that. Sometimes people use cost control to try to force people to go beyond what they think they can do. That can work sometimes. In some contexts, it's very productive, but it also means that there's a high degree of risk, and that the person will basically, to have peace of mind, will accept objectives that you're forcing him to take, and that he will never deliver on that objective, and that once you actually realize that he will never deliver, frequently it's too late. And that means that effectively that you've lost control of the project, and that which might ultimately compromise the project in terms of its profitability and positioning. So cost control should not be the way of, I'd say, blinding people to what needs to be done, but a way to help make sure that the objectives which have been fixed and agreed to, and which are, I'd say, built up, are attainable. My basic tool from a financial point of view was an Excel spreadsheet, or a financial system in which we're able to quantify the vehicle and break down the vehicle into its components. For instance, dashboard, seats, motor, wheels, and things like that. The engineers use very specific programs and simulation tools like CATIA in order to develop the project from their perspective. And also there was, at that time, this is back in 2001, it was basically MS Project, or close to Gantt, and those type of tools which were used to coordinate the timelines and to break down the project development into different phases. And each phase had different types of, I'd say, measurements, metrics. For instance, quality, cost, another aspect which was important, obviously, the delay. And for a vehicle, there's also the question of the weight of the project in terms of as a vehicle, because it has an influence on the consumption of the car of fuel. My tool was a financial tool, Excel. But also from a different perspective, the question is not the computer tool, but what are the management tools which are used. And for that, we had specific meetings programmed at least once a month with each function. So again, the vehicle was broken down into 30 some functions, dashboard, as I mentioned, and different things like that, with a team comprised of an engineer and someone from purchasing. And their task was to report on their development visibility in terms of quality, cost, and delay, of where they stood with respect to the overall objectives which had been defined for their function at the start of the project. So they used their tools to do that, and we used a type of, refer to that as a marathon, because basically we would start at 8 o'clock in the morning and end in the evening in order to review all the different functions, to get a global view of the purchasing, as well as to have a view of the logistics, because in certain industries, the logistics of how do you get the parts from the suppliers to the factory, how do you get the vehicle from the factory to the dealerships. It's very critical in terms of the overall performance, and also from a plant performance point of view. and also consolidate that from not just the price of the parts, but also in terms of the cost of the investments needed to do it. So computer tools are put together with management tools to make sure that you're able to have the, I'd say, the animation and the close relationship with the people who are actually doing the work. Definitely, the project manager cannot be aware of all the new technologies, the changes and things like that. So I think this is where his contribution would be his or her contribution, obviously, would be to be able to analyze the technology. Is it something which is compatible with the project objectives? And that means is the technology mature to be brought into a project which needs to be developed in a certain time frame? And if that decision is made as well, is to try to understand, and specifically with new technology, what are the control gates to make sure that when the technology is blended into the product, will it deliver? So, and this is where engineers, or particularly specifically engineers, people on the technical side, will be challenged to make sure that technology, just for technology, is not a good solution, but that they're able to bring via this technology value for the customer, and also to make sure that it's reliable technology. So, and typically, I'd say, how do you get that technology? Either you work in a small corporation with passionate people who are at the cutting edge of the technology, so, and who typically have products which are not mainstream, but very niche products for people who want to get the technology and who perhaps are willing to accept a degree of reliability less, and also at a higher cost. So these are your niche markets. And if you work in a large corporation, so you have I'd say the luck of having certain people who are not necessarily the same type of engineers, but who are basically looking for this type of innovation. So, and looking for what things could change and tendencies. So large corporations can absorb the cost structure, typically, to have people looking for those things. And then the question is, how do you mainstream, at what speed, that technology? So it could be cutting edge, but it might be too early to be mainstream. So that's here we come back to the importance of communication, and being able to effectively communicate, which means having a conviction, but also means being able to back it up with facts, and being able to understand, if you're speaking with a banker, he will not be interested in the same facts as you might be speaking with an engineer or a Salesforce person, or so it's a question of understanding what facts will be, I'd say, understood and pertinent for each person. So, and in terms of advice to new project managers, I think that the start would be to understand the big picture. So, a lot of people, the question of the trees in the forest, if you like. So, you need to understand both the forest, so what is the size of the forest and where you want to go in the forest, but also to understand the trees. The trees would be the functions: purchasing, engineering, logistics, plant, sales, after sales, and things like that. So how each of the trees fit within the forest. So as a project manager, so this means for me someone who works across boundaries. It's very important that you have this vision of the global project, where the project wants to go, what is the objective, and how perhaps the objective is different compared to what was done in the past. And also to understand how each of the different parts fit together. So that's, I think, the very first important part. And the second, to understand the trees, if you like, you need to put yourselves in their shoes. So you need to say, well, okay, if I'm head of purchasing, or I'm purchasing the seats, or I'm engineer working on a motor. So what information do I need as an engineer, as purchasing, as a plant manager, in order to perform my job? So, and if when you think in their shoes, then that will help you to understand, well, do they have the information that they need to contribute to the project? Because a lot of times the problem is not the question that do they want to do it, is that perhaps they don't really understand what the objective is and what needs to be done. So rather than perhaps first criticizing someone and saying, well, you know, it's wrong or whatever, to come back on the initial assumption sheet is to say, well, did I correctly explain the project milestones, why we're working on this time frame, and what we're expecting from each function? So putting yourself in the shoes of your different contributors is very important to making a robust project planning. And the third question, which I basically evoked, was the question: if you see ambiguity, if you see something which is not clear for others, you have to weed it out. And any time that there's confusion, you can bet that the project will go off course. So, and this is just the way things are. It's if you don't speak with someone and have a common understanding, then you cannot expect miraculously that they will understand your thoughts if you're not clear in what you expect. So there are many ways of doing that. I think these three elements are very clear to getting into project management. So understanding the big picture and understanding the parts, as well as putting yourself in the shoes of other people. So did I give them the information that they need, and do they understand what I need? And in that process, you'll see if there's ambiguity, confusion that you need to weed out. And sometimes that means that you have to push for clarification, which sometimes people don't want to give. But by clarifying things, you have a clearer roadmap for the execution. Well, I think that Shakespeare said it very well, the world's a stage. So and I think we have this opportunity through your studies to open your minds, get a very good skill set, and it's up to you to look at what's the opportunities. Getting an international experience, working overseas or working in a different, I'd say, cultural, linguistical environment is a very good thing to have from the early job on. It doesn't mean that if you don't have it at that early stage, you cannot get it later on. I think it's the question is also who you are, what your ambitions are, and how do you want to live. So there are many ways to live a very good and happy life, to be a good citizen, which doesn't mean necessarily living overseas and things like that, but to be passionate about what we do, and to undertake whether it be the studies or our jobs in a very, I'd say, rigorous and fun way. I think that's for me the best advice is to look to reconcile having a good time with, I'd say, living to your potential.